Here's the janky one. Here, you can have the good one. It's slightly crooked. All right, so the first thing with I want to say about polearms is that this should generally be done with 50% power, focusing on the utilities of the weapons, not just the raw power. They're leverage sticks, and they have more leverage than everything else we use. The only thing that hits harder than these is the montante. Of course, if you put heads or whatever on it, that also applies. As a whole, polearms are best used as support weapons or with a sidearm. So we're talking arming sword. You know what an arming sword is, so I'm not going to grab one. That's the whole point of an arming sword as a backup weapon for this. Also, hand-and-a-half swords or bastard swords are also backup weapons for these. The shorter handle for a bastard sword is so that you can keep it under your armpit. I don't know if you know that already. It's so that it drops straight down, because long swords lean forward and then they would get in the way of side-to-side movements across the chest. So this class will be a general overview of pretty much most of the polearms, but it has a larger section specifically dedicated to quarterstaffs, mostly because that's the one I actually know more about. But also it's honestly one you'll probably see the most unless you're deliberately going into polearms, you know what I mean? They'll use these in some lighter tournaments where they do mixes, but I don't know of any mix that allows anything polearm other than a quarterstaff. And part of the reason the quarterstaff is, well, we'll cover that more into the other one. Real quick, I'm going to head over the generals for polearms, as there tend to be support weapons with a side or with a sidearm, or if you're doing it in a main, you have a side such as the hand and a half. You've seen the montante. The misconception with the montante is because it looks like a sword. It is a sword. I think it's more accurate to say it's intended to be used as a polearm. You can't do undercuts with it. You can't do the swordsmanship manual. It's big, it's heavy, big sweeps. So can you fight sword against it? Yes. Can you fight swords against quarterstaff? Yes. Against any polearm. That's why you carry a sidearm of a sword. But the general gist is that with a montante or greatsword, you're doing sweeping cuts. So I'm just running that motion with ease. And then that keeps an area clear because you can circle around with it using the weight. And therefore, we kind of cover it in some degree in circling classes and in fighting multiple enemies. You can clear areas of space to keep people at bay and create a delay for them to enter. Particularly if you're fighting with multiple people, you come in and do a sweep, which clears everybody around. And then the two from the sides can move in to target individuals, and then you can kind of pick to draw a wall. This allows you to help separate people out, like if you have two guys on one side or multiple. So again, it's support. Fighting one-on-one, a montante does do pretty good against harassing multiple enemies and sweeping large areas, because it has enough mass that it's hard to simply stop with a sword, and you can ratchet, you know what I mean? Where you hit and then it falls in and hits the next. Therefore, you can hit multiple enemies in a row, or opponents, I should say. This means there is some scary effect of not getting a stop. There's also the shoulder and body brace, where you pull the handle and then flip off the shoulder. This is to throw up the blade without a weight. You can also be used by gripping the blade. There's usually the spikes on the front. So if you grab a montante, and you would have it normally something like this, you can actually switch and grab with a closer grip, allowing you to control more of the point. You can use the pommel then as an attack, and fight closer with it before you discard your weapon. That's similar to how you do a quarterstaff position. The other thing is, one of the things that people often do wrong with Montante is that they try and pick up the blade like this. If you do this with a heavy Montante, you're leveraging the full weight up, but it's actually better to pick it up from the hilt. So if you pick it up like this, and then you can rotate the point back. This allows you to swing the much heavier weapon by rotating it around its center axis instead of doing this, which is tiring, right? You rotate the back, swing the point around. Okay? So part of the reason I cover the Montante first is because it's a kind of a reflection of everything that comes after it, but it's sort of the smaller of the items. So from there, I'm going to go into the quarterstaff because in some ways it's the most similar. And this will be the bigger section. The ones after the quarterstaff, I'll kind of just run through. So there are a couple of different things for the quarterstaff. So one is the mire and the reach of a weapon. So the first principle of a quarterstaff is that you want to get as much reach out as possible. A lot of times in movies and all this, you see this middle grip, but this is cutting your reach to the end of this. So in older manuals, European and some of like Chinese, they grab like this or this to control the point, right? And the idea is that you're getting as much reach out of it as possible, right? You should be able to extend forward and hold with both hands, and then now you have full lunge capability. And in many ways, from there, you're using it exactly like a Montante. The same, instead of you lifting the point, you'll lift this, go back, swing, rotate around, and swing, rotate, swing. So it's similar to the sword in that you're crossing and uncrossing and creating loops with the point. So you can do like a figure 8 pretty easily by pushing this point. This gives you some level of point control, right? So sometimes people are grabbing it with a strong arm in the back for more maneuverability of control. And sometimes people are doing it with a weak arm to the back to support the weight. The heavier the quarterstaff is, the more likely you're doing the forward hand. The faster you want to move, the more likely you're doing it with the back. Does that make sense? Because you're more muscle for more control. Also, much like you would do with a spear, there is the option where you're thrusting the weapon forward. And so having your strong hand on the back not only gives you greater point control, it also allows you to push with your back hand as far as you can and input that muscle, right? So you're doing, like I said, a raise of the hilt to drop the point, right? That makes you not get so tired. You're doing circles overhead. And then kind of diving, you can almost do like a false edge drop and then back in. On top of that, you can do hip plants to push the weapon over. So then you're able to dive, hit, move, and if you need to switch on your position, you can. Right. That's the basic stick, a quarterstaff reach aspect. So a lot of times when you see this middle grip, if you have somebody in an open field fighting like this, they're hurting themselves because versus this, they don't have the reach. Now, that doesn't mean that this is useless. This is for corridor fightings or small space. So if you're in a hallway, like in here, I risk hitting the walls. So there's no point in me trying to use this extra reach because I now have lost all my mobility. I can't cut behind me. So I switch to this grip. Now I can switch back and forth. The general concept of using the quarterstaff is that if I'm back and I'm attacking from here, I'm already back. So if I attack with this one lightly, and then I attack with this, the attacking doesn't have to go back and back forward. So it is actually faster than a one-handed weapon in general because each attack is only traveling one way. It's only traveling forward, and the other attack is traveling forward. But it's limited compared to Florentine. One of the arguments you often hear about quarterstaff used this way is it's strictly inferior to Florentine. Mm-hmm. If you cut it in half, you can do the same thing, attack, attack, attack this way, by just doing your hands inverse this way, right? But you can also do two from the same sides, two from high and low, right? You can't do that with a quarterstaff because you'd have to split the staff in half. You also can thrust high and low, which you can clearly only thrust and strike at different angles. On top of that, this is limited to the height of the staff. Like I said, this one's supposed to be 8 feet. It actually feels like it's closer to 7. But the particularly the longer ones that are like 12 feet long, it's still a quarterstaff. In a battlefield, you can use that full size. In a hallway, you can even walk into a lot of hallways at 12 foot. So if you have two swords, Florentine style, you can drive them point first and still maneuver them where you lock yourself into a straight pole, even in a corridor if it's larger than this. So smaller quarterstaff allows a little more mobility inside. The one advantage that a quarterstaff has over Florentine is things like trip and binding attacks, which I'm sure you've seen, the whole catch behind the knee, right? And the leverage that you have is going to be stronger with this. So you can also put your weight into it. So if you were to step with your leg and then push into this, you can push in and break that knee, using your whole body, pulling on this, and then using yourself as a lever. That kind of tripping and then striking with the other end, positioning where you're half controlling it, you'd be allowed to attack in, and then step in, push, and then come down on somebody up close. Okay. It's still not going to be as good as doing this. Mm-hmm. But it has its function. It is fast. It is versatile for grappling, using it certainly better than no hands. But arguably, if you're fighting against like a Florentine fighter, you're going to be outpaced. You're going to have less options for mobility, but you should still be roughly faster than a single-handed weapon. It will cut reach as far as grabbing at this versus a one-handed weapon, where this is going to be better than a one-handed or Florentine generally. There is another grip, and that is a center grip, where you may support with one hand, having either a larger back or a larger front. Typically, the whole idea behind like having a centered grip instead of having like an end or both in the middle this way is that this off center gives you a little bit more reach, but also allows you to plant. Okay, so if you had a horse or something going on coming towards you, you could strike the guy in front of you, plant, the horse runs into it, right? It allows you to switch back and forth. And then this goes into which way you're having the hands. So when you do the center grip, you usually do like thumbs in. The thumbs out is kind of awkward if you feel it. But if you do thumbs in, it's pretty comfortable. And if you transition this into other weapons, for example, a halberd or something, if you had a heavy weight here where we have the tape, in this grip, you can let the weight hang in a relaxing position. So you're kind of attack, parry with this. So for the sake of demonstration, if you had something presented forward, I can parry with this and then strike over with this. Okay, then the weapon of the head of the pole arm is coming at you. Now, again, that's a shorter position, but it also allows things where you're like catching with this hood, striking the leg, blocking in, and then like the back hook or something like that into your opponent. It's a closer fighting style. And again, you have a variation in pole arms. One this size, you can easily fight that way. When you have one that's 12 foot long, you really can't do that. In that case, you're pretty much going to stay at the end. You're going to stand up behind the line. You're going to do the whole shoulder grip like you would on the
like a rifle or something.
Or the montante is where I was trying to go, but yes. So it's a relaxed position, the weight's held high, and that means you're ready to drop that with a pull, right?
Okay, so it's a guide on.
Yeah, because you can just pull the arm down and it's going to come off your shoulder as a rock. So you're catching it not necessarily to slow it down, but to guide it, okay? It's going to hopefully hit whatever target you're aiming for, and that's going to be the stop. You just want to make sure you don't miss. So you're using that for edge alignment with the twist of the back, and then also moving this side to side on that drop. If you're short, again, you're going to go back to the montante thing where you pull, raise the hilt, and then you can bring it back around. Right? And this will work even with the larger one, assuming you have the space. You just go out to the side more and then drop. Okay? The spear basically is in every way a quarterstaff, except it has a pointy end. So in fighting with it this way, you're going to add more thrust to it. In stabbing with that position, in fighting it this way, you'd probably go with the butt end first to parry strike, and then carry it in thrust, right? So it's your defense, and you're parrying for entry into your attack, and then a thrust for the kill. If you're fighting at long range, again, you just have a good thrusting weapon as far as possible. Circling in for cuts. Trying to see if I missed anything real quick. Oh, one more thing with the one-handed grip, whether you're doing it with this hand or with this hand, one, you can plant. The other thing is you can also do like a body plant. So I can rotate this off of my body, and when I pull the hand across, I'm pushing it this way. So if I push just the ends here against each other, I can push, go ahead and push back, and you can push and feel the leverage on your hip, right? Because you're going for roughly middle, right? And then when you push, I'm pushing it back against your hip. You feel it?
Yeah.
So that creates that leverage position. This is the kind of position you're doing when you're going to have like a shield. So you want to have a buckler in one hand. Me not thinking ahead. So you're positioning like this, and you're striking in, able to push this. You're trying to go for the control like you would with a shield, thrusting down, pushing over, and then anytime I try and lock on this side, you can lock that against your body to push back, and it'll leverage. As soon as I push, I'm pushing it into your side. Then you can control with a shield to try and displace, and you're going for like a leg shot. You have this ability to go up and then thrust down. Down being easier leg shots, right? So leveraging works off the body.
I feel like I'm in Greece. I feel like I'm in ancient Greece.
Yeah.
In a hoplite shot.
So this underhanded grip works to throw a spear, but as far as like leveraging, you'd have to leverage the back of the spear. So if I have the point back, I can do what I was saying before, where you're like striking and leveraging at each other, and then as I'm pushing against this and try and displace, I come up like this and then go with the thrust, then I go back with the stick, right? So you're transitioning between the two and with a shield. Okay? That's pretty much all we need for the buckler. All right. Largely, that covers the basic functions of all of them in comparison. For example, glaive, very much like a spear, but instead of cutting or thrusting with it, it's a curved blade, so you're going to cut with it. You would often do it at the end, so you're still doing it like a sword, but the sword is on the end. If you wanted to one hand leverage it, you're still going to leverage it off your body. You're still going to plant it. You're still going to drop and bring it back over. Okay. The sword spear is a little bit different. If you're familiar with that, sword spear is like a straight up arming sword on more like a 4-foot pole. So from there out a sword. That one's held a little bit more like a quarterstaff, leaving the last end like this quarterstaff butt end, and then the sword. You can do it with the sword grip with this one as well. So like if I wanted like a strong end, the thing with the sword spear is you can't perform all the actions of a sword because the back is not free, but you can leverage the weapon. So if I were to strike down with a sword, I can actually push my hip into it to go in for the thrust, to give myself more displacement on the weapon. So if you did the same thing, bring it over, and then, right, but you can bring your body onto it as well. Well, that way, but also like, it's on my strong hand, I'm gonna bring it to my hip. So I bring it this way, and then I actually step into it. So I'm almost backwards with my butt, but I'm still facing you with my chest. And then I'm able to push this way. So step where you almost turn backwards with your hips, but you're still facing forward. There you go. And you feel the difference in that strength?
Yeah.
Like you don't really even try. You just push with that hip, and suddenly your whole body's planted on top of that. Okay? So as a control action, you're going to be a little bit more prone to do that with a close grip quarterstaff, but a sword spear also, where you have that last bit. So now I'm just going to basically run through ones. So the Dane axe or Hungarian axe, essentially a chopping thing on a pole. That's going to be real prone to holding this position. You're going to want to drop it down. If you miss, you're going to do the same thing where you're dropping it down and then rotating the axe to bring it back around. Same thing where you can actually rotate the shoulder to cut from the side and then cut from the side again, so that you're using your whole body weight to transition. And with the axe on the back, holding like the mid grip here, you're rallying with the front for a close quarter fighting, trying to parry block, hit for the leg, and then follow over with the axe. Okay? That's glaive, Dane axe. There's a bardage, which is a large curved axe. I'm sure you've seen it. So it's got a spot that would come off here, and curves all the way to here. It tends to be a little shorter, so there's a handhold here and here. The idea is similar, except for you grab it all the way on the head, so that when you engage, you could lock the weapon and push in. I don't have a thing here, but it would be to push down here and leverage down on the weapon. The pole axe, which is a little deceptive because it has an axe on one side, a hammer on the back, and a spike on the top. It's actually all three. So you're doing the same thing you do with like Dane axes and halberds, where you're coming with a chop, but you can change it over to hit with the hammer side. The hammer side's for basically people in plate. The axe is for people not in plate, but also the axe typically is pointed down on the bottom enough that it can be used to hook people's legs like you would a bill hook. And then the spike is, of course, makes it eligible for a spear. So you're combining all the other aspects of chopping and hitting with a versatility of a different head. And of course the bill hook, which is used in teamwork, where you're grabbing people's foot if they're on the ground to pull it out from under them, drop them prone, make it easy for them to kill. Or if they're on a horse, you're grabbing something and just trying to pull them off the horse. Sometimes multiple at a time, arms, legs, whatever you can happen to hook. If you catch a knight chest plate, pull it off. So there's a pole hammer and a beck of Corbin, which is also called the beak of ravens. So I say those two together, and people will argue the difference. But the general gist is it's a hammer on one side and a spike on the other. The difference between the beck of Corbin and the pole hammer is which one is the priority. If you have a small little spike, like a straight spike and a big hammer, it's a pole hammer. If it's a small little hammer and a large curved spike, it's a beck of Corbin. Beck of Corbin means beak of the raven, so they're just giving that priority. And it has a larger, more pronounced hook, so it's better at filling in for a bill hook. And when you stab people with it, it's easier to pull them off of their spot. Then the hammer acts as an additional weight. Halberd is usually much like a pole axe. It's got an axe, a spike for the spear, but instead of a hammer, it has another spike on the back, which makes it easier to hook people and pull them off than the front. Also, it's more likely to be able to impale armor. So you can actually just stab someone on a horse and pull them off with the hole in the armor that it makes. Sort of like the beck of Corbin, but bigger. All right. So that covers all the pole arms and sort of what we call great weapons, except for clubs and maces. So just like the leverage amplification of the quarterstaff, the maces, well, I would say actually more like the great maces, are leverage based. They're high power weapons. They're wielded in much the same way of moving momentum, but they don't have alignment. So it doesn't matter what edge you hit with, like you would for most pole arms. You just have to hit them. Mm-hmm. So it's easier, and as a result, you can give it to a guy who has less skill and more strength for them to just brute force their way through, because the weapon doesn't require it. And it's going to be effective because the concussive nature of the weapon is so hard that it's hitting through armor. In that same thing, we don't really use clubs and maces and great maces because we don't want to kill people in armor. Same thing with warhammers. There are some variations of maces that have spikes or nails in them, partly used for penetration, but also if you hit somebody with a giant spike mace and they're on a horse, you could still hit and then pull. It would pull them off the horse like any other grappling stuff. Not particularly hemo-relevant, but just for completion's sake, it's there. All right, and that's it for polearms.
Okay, sweet.
All right.